Good evening. Welcome to this session on hybrid war. It's called a Symposia, and I'm told that there will be refreshments on offer. It should be, hopefully it will be an interesting discussion. Since it's not too many of us, I want to keep it quite interactive. What I intend to do is briefly introduce the subject and then hand it over to my esteemed panelists, and then once they have made their statements, we can have an interesting discussion or a question and answer session. The nature of warfare is constantly evolving. 10 years ago, the word hybrid war or gray zone warfare was really not in our parlance. It is interesting that although hybrid war became more of a phenomenon in the last 5 or 7 or 8 years, but it was a US Marine Corps Lieutenant Colonel called Frank Hoffman who first wrote about the concept of hybrid war in a research paper published from the Potomac Institute of Security Studies, which is a Washington-based think tank affiliated with the Marine Corps. Over the years, the concept of hybrid war has become more commonplace, and increasingly we hear the media talking about it more and more. Unlike traditional wars fought solely on the battlefield, hybrid warfare primarily blurs the lines between conventional and unconventional tactic. It employs a multifaceted approach, combining military, political, economic, and cyber operations to achieve strategic objectives. So there are multi-domain operations. There is the principle of non-attribution, where the attacker's identity is deliberately obfuscated to avoid direct confrontation and accountability. Hybrid warfare also allows countries to target the adversary's societal divisions, economic weaknesses, psychological vulnerabilities to destabilize the target nation. And it relies heavily on tools of information warfare, things such as disinformation, misinformation, and so on. If I were to describe hybrid warfare to a layperson in very simple terms, I would say think of it like a boxer who not only throws punches, but also poisons the opponent's water, spreads false rumors about their training, and the goal is to weaken the enemy without any direct confrontation and just by exploiting vulnerabilities in society and institutions. So therefore, it is very critical for us to understand what is hybrid war, how it's changing, how our militaries and societies need to prepare for it, because this is something which can affect any country, any society. And I possibly couldn't have asked for a better panel, because we have a very eminent panel with us, starting with Lieutenant General Arun Sahni, former General Officer Commanding-in-Chief or Army Commander in everyday parlance of the Indian Army. Mr. Imtiaz, noted think tank head, writer, former journalist, and Mr. Petr Topychkanov, who's also a noted think tanker, writer, researcher from Russia. So if I were to start with you, General, if you could kindly give your statement for about 8 to 10 minutes, but I would, along with what you have already decided to speak on, if I could also probe you a little bit on how you think today's militaries need to educate or train its officers and soldiers to deal with hybrid war. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Shafqat. Pleasure to be on the panel with 3 people who seem to be involved in some manner or the other with hybrid warfare, if you want to call it. Our nation states have been involved in some form or the other in this particular activity. But may I just first start by talking about, I was glancing through the media and I keep getting these updates from War on the Rocks. And I think just last week, the headline that caught me was that after the visit to the Balkans, the EU President Ursula denounced and said that hybrid attacks seeking to undermine the Western democracies seems to be apparent in that area. And of course, she was implying that it was after her visit to the Balkans. She'd been talking about the Georgia elections. Then she talked about what has happened about the presidential elections in Moldova. So this whole term of hybrid warfare was utilized. Then, when you look at it, we have to look at in two systems or two sets of blocks that have happened. The current world order is changing. There are geopolitical alignments. The militarization of cyber and space has happened. And as you're aware, there is a changing in the conundrum of geopolitical alignments linked by two issues primarily: the rise of China, and the second issue is that there is a shift in the economic center of gravity from the Euro-Atlantic to the Asia-Pacific. Now, this has created turmoil of its own kind. It has upset what were the set precedences. And then you had these black swan events like COVID-19 and all, which came in, which created an absolute disaster as far as the whole linkages of globalization and perestroika and glasnost was concerned, in the true sense of what it was initially talked about. So in this environment, everything has become volatile. You realize that personal interests became predominant for nation states because you now had means where there were kinetic. Earlier, only kinetic means were there. Now you had non-kinetic means to be able to achieve your political aims or your aims as you desire towards which you felt perceived or led to your national interest. So this whole complex of technology where cyber and space came in, you were able to move into a dimension where you had the capacity to now, without attributability, create and change the cognitive mindsets of the target population of a target country. And for that, the social media is one such instrument that has been talked about here. But then there are so many other methodologies by which this is happening. Disinformation, the utilization of misinformation, fake news, planting of issues which were based on half-truths, capacities to intrude and penetrate organization and institutions which had an apolitical look, which was able to do it. And today, no better way than to talk about what happened against the Hezbollah by the Mossad. How did it work? I mean, it was a 2-year cycle where you created an organization which had the bona fides of having its origins in a trusted environment, and you then utilize technology to blow up and hit the critical components that mattered as far as the Hezbollah was concerned. So this whole story of where you've got kinetic, non-kinetic of influence operations, the utilization of technology because of non-attributability has now given you this complete ambit of what is now called hybrid warfare. So if I had to quickly say what are the tenets of this, I'd just say it's a blend of political and military issues, primacy of non-kinetic means, integration of non-state actors, and tight linkages between the political and the military command structures to execute it. There's an integrated use of militias, info ops, intelligence, special operations. And I think what is also helping out is the penetration, the rustle of money and the shrill mantras of propaganda with the small implanted whisper of spies creates this environment of uncertainty in the mind, and that gets exploited. So if today I had to define hybrid warfare, I would look at there are hundreds of definitions, but I think it's a military strategy that blends conventional warfare, the irregular warfare, and when you say irregular warfare, you've got people in militias, what you talk about, the Wagner group that was so famously came into the news and went out of the news, was operating in Africa, what it did within the current environment of a Russia-Ukraine war. So groups like these, when they come into play, is what you talk about as irregular warfare, and then of course cyber warfare. And from the elements and the mix of this, you can. So what has changed? The space is no longer, the battle space is no longer just the military battle environment where kinetic elements meet. It includes the military and the non-military. It means a target country to a target country. So this whole story of canvas and space has changed. It has blurred the lines of what is war and what is peace. I mean, if I have to exploit cyber domain and influence operations, they're time consuming. It happens over a period of time. So that is where the whole story has now emanated. And if I had to look at I think, and decide, I would just say, a non-standard, complex, and a fluid adversary. In the case of the current Israeli conflict, you've got the Hezbollah. Most of these organizations, except maybe at one stage the Al-Qaeda and the ISIS, in their own avatars, had become independent bodies. But otherwise, all over the world, when you utilize the non-state actors to play, there is the hand of the state somewhere or the other, which is supporting them, which is ensuring that they survive. And as you know, the Hezbollah has the hand of the Iran behind it. That's how they had technology, had weapon systems, which a regular army was supposed to have. So that's one of the issues that comes in. A hybrid adversary uses conventional and irregular methods. Whether you utilize proxies to wage your battle, or you utilize and penetrate the structures within the organization to become what you called overground workers or underground workers or sleeper cells to be activated at time, this whole complex area comes into play. The only thing is that in this environment, you have to be flexible, and you also have to adapt quickly to change. And if you can't, and that's where his question comes in of how do you train a conventional army to fight that here. And I think the other two things that really has to be just looked at, that hybrid warfare, if I have to cull before I come to the training, takes place in three distinct battlefields. The conventional battlefield, the indigenous population of the conflict zone, and the international community. And when I say international community, today the propaganda, if one had to go through the start of the Russia-Ukraine war, the agenda, if anybody who was not aware of the circumstances, you could be convinced with the blitzkrieg of Western media that the Ukrainians had the Russians with their pants down. Whereas people who had operated in those areas knew very, very well that this asymmetry that existed between the two countries could not really see Russia being in such a negative position. But the blitzkrieg of misinformation which started had actually created that bit. And today, when you attribute a lot of faults are put to, and I would say hybrid warfare really came into place in the Russia-Ukraine pre-war areas, starting off in 2010 to 2014, the Euromaidan riots, the Poroshenko switchover, the taking over of Crimea in 2014 to what happened. I mean, I'm sure with Petr here, he'll be the right guy to talk about it. But I would say that really was the start of where you used the irregulars, the regulars, special forces, the green berets. The whole story was well utilized. And that is how it has happened over a period of time. And I would end, I mean, there's a lot we can talk about. We'll see it in question answer, but I'll talk about the training. Yeah, but in the training issue, may I just put it, that one of the greatest remarkable things that happened in the Indian Army, and I can talk for our army, I can't talk for everybody else, but I would say that at one stage about 2 decades ago, some forward-thinking chief of the Indian Army decided there has to be a subject for your promotion examinations called military technology. So not only do you study the art and craft of warfare and the capacity to do this, but we've got exposed to military technology. And that has really set the baseline today for people to be able to tackle and understand the dynamics of this emerging technology field. Today, the Indian Navy, every officer cadet is a B.Tech. And it's not that he doesn't know war fighting, but he understands the capacity of how this technology can be used against him. And so you stand on your feet and be able to take the rectifications, ensure that your capability and capacities can address these issues. So I think this is what has happened. You have to be trained. It's very difficult to tell a soldier that today you're in this dimension, but what you do is set in processes and procedures that influence operations don't matter to the target population. And in this case, it would be the soldiers. You can't stop it. It's all of nation effort to ensure that the population, the critical infrastructure, and all these are taken care of. But within the realm of the military, what we have done is you've created an environment where there are counter-narrative strategies that if you get certain videos on your social media, you share it with a particular set of people, the authenticity of that is established, information is given so that the misinformation campaign doesn't take over. Otherwise, the terminology which is used in our part of the world is a thing called langar gup. Langar gup is the story that starts from the cookhouse or the dining hall. And that travels like wildfire. So that has to be arrested before wrong impressions and wrong issues come into play. And that is what has been done. So we can talk more about it. It's, as I say, a work in progress. Technology is changing, so you really have to keep your act right. Yeah. Over to Imtiaz.
Thank you, sir. That was a very succinct summary of what hybrid war is, and especially very interesting points about innovations in training and education. To Mr. Imtiaz Gul, my specific question that I would kindly request you to also look at is, how do you see the whole issue of disinformation and misinformation? Because information operations is going to be one of the main catalysts of hybrid warfare. When we talk about influence operations as well, information warfare is basically at the forefront of it. So given your long experience with the media, I'd be very keen to hear your thoughts on that. Over to you, please.
Okay. Thank you very much, Shafqat. Shafqat and General Sahni have conspired against me. They preempted a lot what I had planned to say. But it has a very good layout of what hybrid warfare is and looks like. I think would look at it from three different perspectives. In a world that is increasingly troubled, we're all facing headwinds with technological transformation, disinformation, and cold block politics. So the first element in that is how do you conduct the warfare, the hybrid warfare? The first element is like the hot pursuit that nations are deploying unilateral war without basically declaring it, physical invasion of neighboring countries in the name of national security, or acquiescence of and brazen support by the bigger nations in the crimes of their smaller allies, client states. What we have seen in Gaza since October 7 last year, so Israel has been going about killing Palestinians, Syrians, Lebanese, and they also launched attacks on Iran. So this is something we all watch in awe, that for the first time after the World War and the creation of the United Nations, all big nations are still reiterating this unbreakable bond between Israel and their countries, as Israel has killed, meanwhile, over 44,000 people. So this is one dimension of the threats that we face, that cold-blooded acquiescence of the aggressors. And this is, I describe this as the expansion of the exceptionalism that the United States had until now deployed unilaterally, but now NATO and the European Union, lead European Union countries, have also become complicit in that exceptionalism. Then the second dimension is the use of perceived threats as a pretext to proliferate influence, exploit local conditions, to abet or to exploit a local nationalist or sub-nationalist violent conflict, or vie for territorial control. And we see what has been happening around Ukraine, the way the United States and the European Union threw their weight behind Ukraine, which very recently was also challenged by Robert Kennedy in one of his speeches somewhere, where he said that the military contractors of the United States have basically forced the United States into a war that is an indirect tax on the people of the United States of America. So that is a very, very cruel depiction of what has happened through the United States and its allies in and around Ukraine. I'm not going into the merits or demerits of that, but this is the threat, that how for block considerations, countries can invade or abet invasion of other countries. Now, we in Pakistan, for instance, if we look at it, I'm not going into the essential elements of the hybrid warfare. I think the general has already laid them out. We face a similar situation where nationalist, sub-nationalist terrorist groups have been going about in half of Pakistan, conducting violent activities. Almost on a daily basis, our security forces are facing that. So there are Pashtun ethnic groups as well as Baloch groups involved in that. It's a few thousand people spread over two big regions which border Afghanistan and Iran. And for the Baloch groups, we find a lot of sympathy in India, where the National Security Advisor Ajit Doval had been talking about exploiting internal fault lines of Pakistan. That was Baloch nationalism, sub-nationalism, Pashtun resentment versus the capital versus Islamabad. And we have seen like a real hybrid war, which is also being supported through an information propaganda. It brings me to the point that Shafqat has raised. What role does the information or disinformation play in the hybrid warfare? I think it's a critical element, meanwhile, because you don't need big militaries to conduct an information warfare against a target country. All you need is a few television channels. All you need is a few online portals. The European Union Disinformation Lab 3 years ago came out with a report which identified at least a dozen Indian portals, online portals, which were very systematically using disinformation on the groups involved in Pakistan, on what was happening inside Pakistan, how these terrorist groups were pricking the Pakistani interests, the security forces, as well as killing innocent people. So they were amplifying, basically, the Indian portals as described by the European Union Disinfo Lab. They were amplifying even the minuscule incidents in Pakistan, incidents of violence through their media. And obviously, India has a big information machinery as much as the United States. And then the news travels. So we have seen, for instance, in the cases of Financial Action Task Force, I hope you are all aware of that, how Financial Action Task Force or the United Nations Geneva headquarters were also used to defame, to discredit, to exclude, to malign Pakistan. So that was also part of the hybrid warfare that Pakistan has faced. Even sports was used for that. So as a whole, the smaller nations, I'm not now going into not projecting Pakistan as an innocent player in the region. Pakistan has had its own share of problems, its own doings, which then invited a reaction from India. But then India started pretending innocence, that we are not doing anything last minute. But then we saw through the European Union Disinformation Lab, as well as many other channels, how this hybrid warfare through financial institutions, through media outlets, through online portals, and through fake news and disinformation was being used to run down the image of a country next door. I'll end here. We can talk more about it later. Thank you.
Thank you. Moving away from our region into somewhere further afield, we now go to Petr Topychkanov, and I have already discussed with you before that we would be very curious to hear from you about what is known as the Gerasimov doctrine, and also how hybrid war first came into the picture in the case of the Russia-Ukraine conflict.
Thank you so much, Shafqat. This term was mentioned. The launch of public use of this term, such as Gerasimov doctrine, was related to the name of Mark Galeotti, quite famous author and podcaster, who in one of his scientific articles mentioned that, and he referred to a couple of articles in scientific journals and in newspapers, special military newspapers in Russia by General Valery Gerasimov. However, after this hot debate, later he wrote another article when he mentioned that there is something like a doctrine, Gerasimov doctrine, so it's a nonsense. And there are, I don't want to mention the Russian authors and official responses to that. I want to give you another name from the United States, a good specialist on military affairs, and especially who follows closely military affairs on the ground in the conflict between Russia and Ukraine, Michael Kaufman, Michael Kaufman, who also mentioned that there is not such a thing as Gerasimov doctrine. What is about? The article by Valery Gerasimov was published in 2013. It was about the value of science in foresight. And he argued in this article that the boundaries between war and peace have blurred, making non-military methods more effective for political and strategic objectives. These methods increasingly utilize political, economic, informational, and humanitarian measures, and it's already discussed today by my co-panelists. That the problem is that he wrote this article about the actions by the West against Russia. But the idea about the Gerasimov doctrine, as it's well known in public, it's more about what is happening between Russia and Ukraine. And especially it became quite popular in the context of this crisis between Russia and Ukraine, and in 2014-15. In 2015, Deputy General Secretary of NATO, that time it was Alexander Verzhbov, he mentioned that Russia used the full spectrum of methods of hybrid warfare against Ukraine. However, at the same time, and because this is the question, at the same time, General Secretary of NATO mentioned that there is nothing new in this complex of methods being used in offenses by one country against other country. What's the difference? The difference is skill. The difference is scale, speed, and interconnection of these all actions. Well, it's quite difficult to assess when scale, speed, and interconnection changes this approach, as we name it, hybrid warfare, into something new, very different from what, for instance, was happening during the Cold War. Because in the Cold War between Soviet Union and the United States, there were many different actions, including propaganda, information, and so on and so forth. For me, still, as from scientific point of view, there are open questions. What is new about that? But what I can see, at least for now, there are some dangerous things. Because when in the public domain, it's accepted the idea that, for instance, one country, in this case, it's mentioned that it's Russia, having a hybrid war against, for instance, the West, it means that a lot of actions, not necessarily all well attributed to Russia, and not all accepted by Russia as it was like produced by Russia or started by Russia, explained in the public as something as a part of the Russian war against the West. And the same in the Russian media as well. Everything, such as political opposition, such as social media, Facebook, Instagram, and so on and so forth, it's also like connected to something like a complex war, hybrid war by West against Russia. And for me, it's a very dangerous. Between, in the case, for instance, of actual war, there is a law. Of course, in the case of military confrontation, the sides couldn't follow all the laws, international law regarding that. But at least there is a law, there is a traditional war, and so on and so forth. And also, in the case of war, a country declares the war. It means it changes its politics inside, militarization of economy, and so on and so forth. But and war has a very clear goal: what to achieve during this military offense, and so on. In the hybrid warfare, if we believe that other side has a hybrid war against us, sometimes it's quite difficult to understand without any declaration what is the goal, what is the reason of this, all the complexes, to destroy, to make us weaker, to do what? But also there is a positive side of the story. The positive side of the story, and Imtiaz, you mentioned that this war against declaring war, the positive side is that if the country decides not to declare war, and at the same time has a number of actions in this field, it means that it's ready to de-escalate. It's ready to use the flexibility to put pressure on other side, but at the same time, it doesn't want to have a hot war, to want to remain under some level of non-return. So for me, it's like a small piece of positive news about the hybrid warfare in the current circumstances. And I will be glad to continue this during the answers to questions.
Thank you, Petr. Very interesting points you have raised. One thing that really jumps out at me from what you have said is that how do we govern this new nature of warfare, right? Because conventional wars are covered under laws of armed conflict. So there is the international legal basis for, or legal regimes which govern how countries go to war, fight war with each other in the conventional means. For decades, we have been trying to develop similar legal regimes for nuclear warfare. But hybrid warfare is a whole new frontier. So what kind of legal regimes need to be put in place so that this kind of warfare is also fought in a manner where laws and rights are not violated? So I think that's a very important question. We will now go to our audience, because the meaning of a symposia coming from ancient Greece is you have a convivial discussion lubricated by drinks and food. So now that drinks have been served and there are some nibbles on your table, I think we can commence the discussion. So please raise your hand. There's a microphone. So I already see 2, 3 shows of hands. 4. We'll start with Colonel Iftikhar.
Thank you very much to the panel for a wonderful speech. I've got a few questions. I'm sure you have got enough time. First question to General Arun Sahni. There was a pager attack in Lebanon in last September 24, where at a time 3,000 pager exploded. To your understanding, this is of course a attack, which is a clandestine attack, of course, and of course it was probably out of imagination for many. From your understanding, was it avoidable for Hezbollah or Lebanon? This question to you. My next question to Mr. Petr. Nord Stream 2, there's a gas line between Russia and Germany that was under attack last year. What kind of protection you think is possible undersea, such a few kilometers undersea? Is it possible to protect, or you have to leave it on Almighty or your luck? Next question to Mr. Gul. Pakistan is also one of the countries who has nuclear power. Do you think that nuclear power has made the country more stronger, or it is a threatening issue for you? Thank you.
So, quite a diverse set of understandings of hybrid warfare. In my understanding, hybrid warfare is a rather vague and dilute term which can be operationalized and exploited. So on the one hand, it's a concept to describe a certain form of warfare. I mean, the term itself derived in the 1980s from the US, but of course it's been something practiced throughout history and time. But on the other hand, it's also an accusation, like this nonsense about Gerasimov doctrine, which is a note warning about Western hybrid warfare. So you've got this as well, but I get the impression that it is a means to justify the otherwise unjustifiable actions and for legitimacy by creating a moral panic. So the question being, what part of these understandings, the concept, this political exploitation, or this accusation, which do you think is more prevalent in the current use of the word hybrid warfare?
Thank you. There was a question from over here. Yeah.
Good evening, I'm Lieutenant Commander Naim. I'm a Principal Warfare Officer of Bangladesh Navy. My question is, the term hybrid warfare may be new, but isn't the misinformation, disinformation, or political influence wasn't in place before, maybe in Cold War? Again, if we see in Russia-Ukraine war, Russia has never declared war against Ukraine. Rather, they termed it as special military operations. So I have a question to Mr. Petr. As you are seeing it as a positive side, but we can see it is not following the IHL, that is International Humanitarian Law, or laws of armed conflict, or Geneva Convention, as it is not a war. So what about the human rights issues it is doing? Again, we can see in Russia-Ukraine war, both sides, they are spreading lots of misinformation, like Ukraine is defaming RT News and vice versa. Also in case of Israel and Palestine or Gaza, they are also doing the same. So maybe we are terming it as hybrid warfare, but isn't it an older issue, like in new terms?
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. We'll take one more question and then we'll go back to the panel. And I think we'll have time for another cluster.
Good afternoon, panel. I am Taposh Bhanju. I am a student studying public administration at University of Dhaka. I have been a defense enthusiast for years. So my question is kind of technical, that we have seen the regular use of a swarm of mini suicidal drone that can easily penetrate the most protected area, or even the pinpointing the targets. That I want to know that what does the panel think about the introduction of combination of drone warfare and AI, artificial intelligence, in hybrid warfare, and what will happen if the AI goes rogue?
Great question. Thank you. What if the AI goes rogue? So I think we'll start in reverse order. Petr, we'll start with you.
Thank you so much, Shafqat. The first question was about protecting undersea constructions. And by the way, it's well connected with the last question, because with the development of undersea uncrewed platforms, the possibility of using force against undersea constructions, pipeline, internet lines, as already happened in the Indian Ocean as well. It's more often thing that can happen. So the best way, as it was discussed already, it's about having observing capabilities, just to observe these infrastructures 24/7, to understand when and who moves in this area, and so just to be ready to react quickly. So it's because infrastructure is huge undersea. It's just sometimes it's difficult to imagine, but in Bangladesh it's well known, it's like in India and in Pakistan as well. So that way, to protect everything is just impossible, especially when these technologies of undersea drones they are developing very quickly. That is why, for me, it means that there should be established zones with development of reconnaissance and surveillance capabilities undersea, and just to observe the situation and to be ready to react. Fast reaction forces on the top. As for the question about what Greg asked, in general, I agree with you. It's about using this. You mentioned the word to create panic. I would say not necessarily. It's also about mobilize population to be ready to be more cautious about reading news, because it's a mutual accusation from Russia and the West that there are some very fake news, misinformation. So that means that if, for instance, in the Western media there are the reports that some informations are created by Russia, it means that it's like a message to the audience: be cautious, not to follow everything published online. And the same valuable in Russia as well. So it's like a mutual game. It's not just something happening in the West or in the Russia. And it's about your question about. It's exactly my point, and yeah, I agree with you. It's an old technology. They are developed due to new developments in AI, in deepfakes, and so on and so forth. But they are the old technologies, and it means that we have these techniques how to deal with that. It's a question about. The first question is. Previously, a limited number of people were targeted, but because now we have access to cell phones and to the news, it means that we are all can be targeted by misinformation, propaganda, and so forth. It means that the question about educating wider groups of people, how to deal with information, how to operate in this very hostile atmosphere. This is the answer for me, at least.
Okay, Mr. Gul.
Yeah, thank you very much. First, actually, to your question when you raised that can there be rules of game for hybrid warfare? Look, even if there are rules of game or regulation, who cares? Do the powerful nations really care? There's a Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Israel has torn it to pieces. So, because they think they need to do for what they are doing for survival. So I think regulation in this bloc political world
doesn't really work.
Yeah, it doesn't really work. Now to your question on whether the nuclear weapons have made Pakistan stronger or weaker, I think the nuclear weapons basically minimize chances of an all-out war with India. Secondly, the nuclear weapons also offset the conventional forces disparity with India. However, we needed much more than that. We needed an economic reforms plan, structural reforms to progress, to project us as a very stable nuclear power. It did not happen. So we kept dithering on the reform, and that's why Pakistan currently is in dire economic straits. We could have done much better had there been a vision for the need for economic reforms. Thank you.
General Sahni.
Actually, a lot of questions. So let me just talk on two or three things initially, and then I'll come to the questions. See, when the Treaty of Westphalia of 1646, when it came out, the defense of a nation state was based on its territorial integrity. There's an article on a sense of security by Walter Lippmann in 1964 or 65, which actually brought out that the ideologies which threatened the democracy of the NATO countries, it led to this NATO Warsaw rift where ideologies became the issue for protecting the state, because it was an ambiguous kind of thing. And then subsequently, I would say, come down to the Kissinger era, it actually came down and ensured that the security was included human security, food security, and all these aspects. So defense of a nation state emanated and gravitated over a period of time to the security of the state. And that's where what Mr. Imtiaz at some stage talked about hot pursuit operations. What was done by the US to capture and follow people who came in maybe at the peak of those Cuban crises or in the seas, this hot pursuit, then got legitimized this over a period of time. So today in this world of turmoil and turbulence, the three things, as I said, that happened, in this world, it came out that your national interests have to be protected. And the minute you have looked at these global commons, which was cyberspace, the Arctic, the oceans, the minute the militarization has started, the elements of hybrid have come in. Cyberspace was used for the good of people. The internet was for the good. Now we are reaching a stage where you'll have to carry out segmentation if you want to protect your critical infrastructure. If I want to protect my country from various places, and maybe the positive list which came out, and we're banning 436 various apps which came out from China, was basically, it was getting a whole spectrum of the mind space of the different fissures that existed within our nation, and they could be targeted independently. So this whole story had to be on technology. Now, when you come in that space, the question which you raised to me about ethics, that's what it implies. I mean, was it right? Was it wrong? I'm sorry. When national interests are there, as far as militaries are concerned, military ethics are soldier to soldier. Here today, we are all attributed to the capacity and capability of what the Israeli intelligence services have done. But I'm sorry, there is no direct linkage as of now which attributes it to that. And to just tell you, I mean, 20 years of my junior life in the army, I was fighting a proxy war in J&K. What did we do? We had these IED attacks, which used to go on the help of a mobile phone. What did we do? We created jammers. Then we utilized the geography and had larger jammers, which ensured that you covered the wider spectrum of age. So from a 2-digit number initiation, it became a 3-digit, it became a 4-digit, it became an 8-digit. So then we created things which are now our indigenous, things like Taurus, which scanned this whole spectrum to be able to jam automatically like a frequency hopping set. Are you getting my point? So the issue of war happened, and terrorism and these kind of things came into play, where non-attributability has come in the global commons. You cannot talk about ethics at all, yeah? Because Israel says it's my interest, the Palestinians felt it was their interest to go and kill those 1,200 people or whatever they killed. I mean, the figures can always be debated. But they carried out and precipitated an action which took a reaction. And that is why in the India-Pakistan context, we keep saying we don't go into tactical nuclear weapons. It's in the realm of a political and a strategic weapon. At the minute, and if you see, the tactical nuclear weapons were created by the US to beat the asymmetry that existed with Russia. And then they created the MTCR so that neither could you hit Russia nor could you hit USA. So you only jammed the whole of Europe here, as far as that was concerned. So the whole story was linked to issues to that. So today I would say non-attributability of what they did, ethically, was it correct, wrong? I don't think I would like to answer that question. This congruence of technology. One of the greatest things that any nation state requires, and that is the problem for smaller nations, maybe India is now evolving into that middle income area, we might be able to do. Your sovereignty of communications is yours. There are only 4 companies in the world that prepare chips. One was Samsung, the other 2 are Qualcomm, 2 are Taiwanese, one is Chinese, Huawei, and the other is Samsung. Samsung is stopping its chips. The rest of the world, including all of us, are sitting on 2 chips, both from Taiwan, the trustworthy. So the sovereignty of your communication, the day you can do it, and your encryption, you will keep yourself safe from this normal thing which was there. Now today, if you want to talk, if I'm sitting in a hybrid, I might as well keep it here. I don't want it next to my ear. Isn't it? So the sovereignty in communications, where you control the chip, which actually is a 28 nanometer chip that you require, is where you will gain impunity from that kind of threat. Till then, I'm sorry, you have to rely on trustworthy resources of input. Just to give an example, we had the SCADA is the distribution network for power, and each state in India's got 30, 35 with the union territories. So each state has its own control center. That control center, when the bids were open, went to 6 Chinese companies. That whole bids had to be cancelled because that gave you a leeway into your critical infrastructure. So let me just put it like this, that today technological immunity will happen if you have sovereignty in different spaces. And today, for this, is the sovereignty and the issue of the chip. So sovereignty in your personal communication capability, encryption devices everybody has. I think Pakistan has, Bangladesh should have its own encryption. So encryption is not so critical as much as this is concerned. What will happen when quantum communication comes in, God alone knows. Yeah. and China is already moving in that direction. So you've got a different story that's coming out of that area. If I could come on to the issue which you talked about, the protection of Nord Stream, which was 1 and 2, and it all came under debate. Was it Norway on the insistence of the US that really blew it up, or was it the Russians? But now that Putin's thing in the last dialogue has clarified that Nord Stream 1 is working. So if Europe wants energy, please, I mean, there is a stream that you can put it on. The Nord Stream 2 may not be able to do. So I think this global commons, when you talk about freedom of navigation of space, when India talks with Bangladesh that we are the 2 littorals of Bay of Bengal, we cannot allow the US and China to get a foothold along with Myanmar to come in that area. We don't want the Bay of Bengal to become the South China Sea. So that's where you're talking about. So that's how we talk about these issues. The word on Gerasimov, I must tell you, it's a very interesting thing. Gerasimov was never actually a terminology used by the Russians. It was something which was used by the Western media. The principal advisor, the Selvoki, who was with Putin, I'm forgetting who was done in the purge and the second thing, called it non-linear war. And non-linear war looked at intrusion into the financial and business houses in Europe, in Germany, and the media houses. Later on, I can tell you some of the names where they had penetrated. So the noise that was created before this influence operations and misinformation started, he actually used those quarters to create this kind of a hype about the whole story about what happened in Ukraine. But that's a different story. Hybrid as a word, sir, which is what I think over a period of time, all these have gravitated into a different realm. It's become loosely.
Take more questions now.
Yeah. Okay, no, this last thing that you wanted was the mini swarm and AI if it goes rogue. This is what you're looking at. So the counter drone system today are looking at. AI gives you that the control of any of the swarm drones that gets knocked off, it automatically, the other one becomes the command and it moves around. Now you're looking at how do I break this? So you have those counter drone systems. As of now, it still hasn't been, they say it's a thief and a police game. The robbers will always get the technology right, and it's then only that the government will get the answer right. So this chasing will always remain. But it is something which is happening. But there is a probability, and that probability of AI going rogue won't happen because that's a matter of fundamental algorithms, you guys, technically. So it can't go rogue in that sense. How I can intrude it and make sure that I deface the algorithm in the malpractices that happen, which is how you do all your ransomware attacks here today. What is happening?
Thank you, sir. Thank you. We'll take a couple more questions and then come back to our panel again.
Take Gaza is an example. You mentioned that nearly 45,000 civilians have been killed in this 1 year. And I understand that states and certain actors, they would support this extermination of Palestinian and the genocide. But then in the West, in many other countries, you have common people, let's say the young generation, and a huge percentage of that are also, let's say, supporting the genocide. And personally, I believe that the people who support killing of civilians or extermination of any people, irrespective of identity, religious, whatever, maybe they have some rational interest, or they could be evil by nature, which I don't believe they are, or they may receive false information and their perspective is very different. So my question here is, to what extent the role of media has played in changing the perception of people to see what is going on the ground. Thank you.
Thank you. There's a question at the back, and then we'll come to you.
All right, my name is Peace Chikodinaka Ezi. I'm from Nigeria. I'm a journalist. And then I've been following the conversation on the emerging threat, the hybrid warfare, and of course, the future of global security. And of course, we cannot talk about global security without talking about peace, and of course, and how much hybrid warfare has found a space into the global peace of the world. The world has continued to be a fractured place because from Hezbollah to Gaza to Russia to Ukraine, there are pockets of violence and insecurity in all of these areas. However, what seemed to be of great concern is the fact that the world seemed to be more concerned about these other countries in the global south, but not many persons are talking about Africa as a whole. Because when you look at what is going on in Africa, particularly West Africa, where there has been a resurgence of coup and counter coups, what you would see is the infiltration of hybrid warfare. So what methods can be used? Shouldn't the world or shouldn't the world also take a cue of try to see how they can also ameliorate the issues in West Africa? Because if West Africa goes down, the world too is affected.
Thank you so much. Here in the middle.
I'm a technologist, Naima. My question is, India expects Bangladesh to go along with whatever the Quad is planning. Is that going to be our fate when, what's the calculation with Taiwan? You don't want the Chinese to interrupt this process. If they don't interrupt the process, in the last World War, the subcontinent lost about 20 million people because of what the British did. So are we from Bangladesh expected to send our Gen Z and the next Gen Alpha young boys down to fight with you guys? What's the plan here? I want a clear answer on this. And resource calculation, what are you actually asking us from the Bay?
I'm Ho Chi Minh. I work for transgender rights. My question is, Mr. Shafqat, you can answer. So hybrid warfare tactics include misinformation and propaganda, which could exacerbate societal divisions. Given the rising incidence of violence and discrimination against minorities in Bangladesh, especially gender and sexual minorities, what measures can be adopted to counter narratives that further marginalize these communities and ensure their inclusion in national security strategies?
Thank you.
I'm Maun. I'm from Dinajpur, Haji Science and Technology University. My question of Sahni sir, in the main national newspaper and the television talk show, the prominent scholar and the thinker of Bangladesh noticed that Modi government developed their relationship just only specific selected people of Bangladesh, not only Bangladesh peoples. In these relationships, it's a possibility of hybrid war between the Bangladesh and Indian government. And my additional question is, the Bangladesh general peoples comment about the Indian and Bangladeshi relationships in the tea gathering in the local market. They think that Modi government treated Bangladesh as a servant, not a neighbor.
Okay.
Has it any?
Got your point. Yeah.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Yeah. The organizers have just extended the time for this session, so we can take a couple more questions. Yes, we'll go here. Yeah.
My name is Mohammed Jahidul Islam. I'm a teacher. In traditional warfare, we can actually make a distinction between military component and a non-military component. So, though I know that there is no such strong legal framework regarding hybrid warfare, but still, actually, as you said that it's a kind of unperiodic. I mean, there's no such period that misinformation, disinformation may be spread as part of hybrid warfare, and people are also also part of that warfare. So, how actually distinct between military and non-military component, as well as institutions as well, military and non-military institutions.
Okay, thank you. There was another question in that table.
Good evening. I'm Lieutenant Commander Ashraf, currently serving in Bangladesh Navy. As far as the NATO definition goes, hybrid warfare includes political interference, sabotage, subversion, and malign influence activities. Now, as the line of warfare has blurred due to the hybrid warfare, my colleague previously asked, how do we actually govern these? Because for land warfare, we have IHL, Geneva Convention with special protocol, additional protocol 1 and 2. We have San Remo manual. But as there is no clear definition or clear legal framework, how do we put someone accountable for such activities? For example, with due respect to our neighbors, those media played some negative role building narratives among their people against our country. So in this aspect, how do we make someone accountable for this? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any further questions from the back?
The question was, instead of doing what we're doing with the Quad, why can't India ask the US and the Chinese to come together and do a project in South Asia that brings them together? Why are we playing this kind of tit-for-tat game? It doesn't really help us in South Asia. Why don't we force them to put $1 trillion in this economy instead of wasting so much in warfare?
Okay, thank you. I think we will now come back to the panel, and if there is time left, maybe we can take another cluster of questions and continue the symposia. So lots of questions are attributed to you, sir.
Okay, let me first start. I think one of the biggest problems today in South Asia is whether it's India, whether it's Bangladesh, whether it's Pakistan. It doesn't seem to be, I would say, impartial in the manner in which it reports. The problem for all these media channels is that they have now become business houses. He functions on a TRP, right? You know? So he makes his money. So if you were the anchor for that show, you will be sacked if people don't see viewership at the correct time. Isn't it? So he has to find and generate issues which will decide. As they always famously say, is it news if a dog bites a man? No. But if a man bites a dog, it's bloody news. Yeah, that's what you want, isn't it? So I'm sorry. So the majority of the young generation, which I attribute yourselves to be more sensible and domain specific, falling prey to stupid hyper emotional hypes on media and forming opinions of your friends and your neighbors would be the weakest link of this young generation. I've got, my daughters are also about 40, my grandkids are about 10. So what I'm trying to say is, you all have to be sensible that the role of media is not right. Have you ever seen the American media reporting poorly of what happened in all those universities where they thrashed the hell out of students who sort of went on campaign? Did you see it? But in our case, there'll be one blast and there'll be 100 bloody flashes. By the time you go to sleep, you'll only be seeing that dead body or that flash there, isn't it? So the maturity of our media, as I say, you can't control the media. The media has to be mature enough to be able to ensure that it reports the right thing. This weaponization of media is being exploited at all levels. I'm quite conscious, I don't understand Bengali or speak Bengali, except when we were youngsters that you knew only those lines were when you saw a pretty woman on the road. I mean, so I can't use that in this forum. But what I would say is that all of you who are watching only West Bengal media, please remember, don't even let it, if you have, I mean, I know you've got grey matter, but let it just sort of slide through your hair and forget it. Have you ever seen a street protest in India, in Bengal, which says we don't want the Bengali migrants coming from Bangladesh? Have you seen a street? No. You've only seen it on a talk show with 6 idiots talking about nonsensical stuff. How can you form opinions? Yeah, please. I thought your generation is more mature than that. So please look at it mature. Have you seen any national media in India other than Bengal, which is not in Bengali, which talks about all this nonsense which you've been hearing? You haven't. I've got the best of friends in the armed forces here who've done courses and we've done missions together. Not only here and even in Pakistan. Maybe we don't talk because both of us will get very shortlisted if we had to get talking to each other. So that's a different story. But what I'm trying to say is, please be educated. Have you seen any such kind of revoke and statement by a politician other than or by anybody except when you're having elections? At election, I want that vote of X, Y, and Z. That's why he's picking you up, isn't it? So please be a bit more mature. The second issue I'll come to is Quad, which you wanted. India has been fighting that Quad is not a military alliance, which is what the West wanted. And the hot and cold of Quad in the spectrum of the United States varies depending on how it perceives itself to be. We have 7 verticals in Quad, which has actually looked at addressing your supply chain grievances and issues related to health. You're looking at different facets. Nothing to do with militarization. Training between armies is happening across the world. We were training with the first India-China exercise was done when I was a corps commander under my charge. Are you getting my point? So if people are cooperating. When climate change happens and disasters happen, you go to the first responder. How does everybody from the Red Sea come out in piracy? Does it see, is it a Pakistani ship or a Slovakian ship or a Chinese ship? The nearest body, whether it's Indian, US, anybody goes and reacts and saves those people. Are you getting my point? So please don't think that Quad is an issue. There is an article of mine, if you go on my LinkedIn and please see it, this is what I've said. India is playing the balancer by being in BRICS, being in SCO, being in Quad. We have not allowed it to become an alliance. I disagree with my panel where he talks about a Cold War. Sorry, that is what we want to avoid. It's a polycentric world order. India and China have, after 2020, have had a break in relationship. Our trade has grown by 40 billion. It used to be 80 billion, it's 120 or 30. Are you seeing my point? It's a polycentric world order that's coming. A Cold War of the Warsaw and NATO is history. You can read about it in storybooks. It's not going to happen again. So what I'm trying to say is, India is trying to do a balance. What we are talking about, the Bay of Bengal, which is what I presume instigated that question was, why is freedom of navigation being talked about through South China Sea? Malacca Strait is not the problem. If 70% of China goes, 50% and 60% of what comes to India, Bangladesh and Middle East comes through that only. Are you getting my point? So the counter leverage exists. If I finger you, you'll finger me. I don't want to finger myself. Do you want to? So excuse me. So I don't want Bangladesh to die. You're 300 million, I got 1.4 billion here, excuse me. So who's going to die? Sorry, I think you're getting it wrong. We are looking at balancing and ensuring that outside players don't come. Your and my interest is protected. The coastal treaties, utilization of these harbors, protecting yourself. I came last year and we are doing this project for mangrove forest being protected, because I can't make my Didi understand in West Bengal, but I could make you guys understand that it's more important. So the project has started here in Bangladesh, Khulna and southwards. Are you getting my point? So please don't think India is wanting to push you. And anyway, why should we push our neighborhood policy? Since somebody raised in the morning, 40 megawatts of power from Nepal, which has come through our transmission, has been just provided last week. When we said you need to be linked up. The Petropol, the second capacity has been doubled. Both the India and the Bangladesh side has been done last month, has been done post August 5th. So everything that happens, what happens is the charismatic relationship of leaders ensures things happen faster. But in the end, it happens for the people of the country. Yeah? And today there are 1,000 visas which our ambassador talked about. Medical tourism is going on. Yeah? Who in Calcutta doesn't want a Bangladesh medical chap to come there? He's making money here from you guys. Is it? I don't want to send it to Bangkok, yeah? Isn't it? So are you getting my point? So please don't think that there is a euphoria. We are big. Size-wise, you're a little small. We've got 30 states and some of our states are bigger than maybe what Bangladesh is, yeah? When I look at you, Uttar Pradesh, it's as big as California. I mean, if I had to compare it in terms of regional. So what I'm saying is, there is this phobia and the younger generation has to understand. Don't go by this media which is run by corporate houses to make money here. Let me just come on to the last issue. One was tackling of disinformation. That's the same story. I mean, I think media, please don't get too... governing in warfare, I'm sorry, as I think was very correctly said by Mr. Imtiaz Gul, there are no quarters. It's your national interest, your national policy. India has been suffering a proxy war for the last 30 years. Yeah? It's not coming from the moon, yeah? Isn't it? And anyway, it's landlocked. So the only land that is there is Pakistan. Now, whether they do it with state connivance or not with state connivance, I'm not going to say. But I fought there for 20 years, yeah. I've lost buddies and colleagues there, yeah. So, and I studied in school there. So please remember, and my son-in-law also comes from that area. So it's a different story. So what I'm trying to say is, we are well versed with hybrid warfare. And why did the world talk about terrorism, yeah? Nobody listened to India. We were screaming from 1980s. Suddenly the WTC towers came down. Thank you very much. US got kicked in the butt. They said, hello, there is terrorism. And the world is not talking about it. We said, yeah, last 20 years we have screamed, our throats have gone parched, some trouble is there. Are you getting my point? So please remember, the rules of the game are created by the big guys. Make sure that we want to get into the big guys so that we control and become the balancing. So the middle powers will have a role. If the middle power like India does well, South Asia will only thrive. It will not go down. I am not a fool to realize why I want my resilience in supply chain. Today, I don't want to do trade. Your textile industry, which you talked about, I'd be delighted to have supply chains. What I manufacture today of semiconductors there, I want the finer capability which exists with the hands and the thrift of people in Bangladesh become party to it. That's how our fab is in Assam. It's not in Rajasthan. Which is there, because he can't do that. वो उधर उसका नहीं काम चलेगा. This can happen only with deft hands. Are you getting my point? So there is a tremendous linkage when it comes to that. I'm sorry, I can talk a lot about it. We'll talk about it on a glass of beer. Anybody else who's got questions with me?
Yeah, thank you very much. Basically, it was about whether media, the role the media can play, whether it can change opinions. Just give me, let me give you this example of Donald Trump. Today, I think we got this statistics that he got 76 million popular votes compared to the 73 million votes for Kamala Harris. Now, did the media play a role in it? Only partially, because 76 million people basically believed in what Trump has been saying. He said nothing new. Similarly, this more than 3 times this number of people believed in what Elon Musk was saying via Twitter, via X, in support of Donald Trump. So media can hype up, it can create frenzy, whip up a frenzy in support, in favor of one person, person A or person B. It cannot change opinions. Only perhaps a small fraction of the population can get impacted by the media, the fence sitters, who are still waiting, weighing their options, which way to go. And this always 5-10% people, they can get influence. Otherwise, the main body of the voter hardly, I think, pays any attention. So you have to be, this is what I keep telling people, you have to process information yourself critically. Ask why. Only then pass on or share that information, because in these days it has gone crazy. People are putting out on Twitter or on WhatsApp posts which don't make sense, and that's why you have to really take every post with a big pinch of salt, and only then perhaps would you realize that right now the artificial intelligence, the AI generated speeches, one speech by President Biden was doing rounds in Pakistan 3 days ago. So the moment I got it, I told the people that this is AI generated, just trash it. So this is a very critical phase right now for everybody. Be careful, extremely careful, and critically analyze before you share or comment or process an information.
Yes, please. I have 2 points. The first point is in this gray zone, of course, everything plays a positive and negative role. And as well, I can give you an example about a media role. In the context of the current confrontation between Russia and Ukraine, there is a special, like a role for guys, военкоры, military journalists. They are in the battlefield, they are covering everything. They are very famous in Telegram channels, they have many people following them. And in general, in the West, they are considered as a propaganda tool. because mostly they are following the state narrative about it. So from this point of view, it's difficult to say that they are the journalists. But at the same time, in the lack of the picture from these areas, they are helping the public in Russia to understand that it's actually violence, it's actually a military situation just inside Russia. And when it was about the Kursk region, and in concerning other areas disputed between Russia and Ukraine as well. And even more, they time to time they reported about misdoings, about something that happened on behalf of some guys on the ground, and it was reported to the top of the Russian leadership. Russian leadership reacted and helped to correct the situation. So it's exactly the case. So they are not journalists in the narrow sense. They are something that is usually considered as propaganda, but they help to bring some information about the situation and even to correct some stuff. So that is why everything has a double role, positive and negative. And back to your question about how to govern this area. Of course, there is no simple answer to this question. For me, there are several things. First of all, we can have some specific regimes dealing with specific areas. As it was mentioned by General Arun Sahni about militarization of space. In general, there is a conversation in international organizations about non-weaponization of space, and the consensus is not to test anti-satellite capabilities with destroying objects in orbits, because it would harm peaceful activities by other countries as well, don't having such capabilities. So because we all understand this is a common space. Also, there is another example. In general, there is an international consensus about the norm not to test nuclear weapons. Of course, there are some conversations in the United States and Russia about resuming nuclear tests, but there is a moratorium, and India follows, Russia follows, United States follows for China. So even without legal norms, there are some values in this area, and it helps us to have some kind of predictability. Of course, there are other instruments, such as code of conduct, for instance, somehow fixing these values. And also, there is a very good thing. Just before me, it was mentioned about terrorist activities. We can create some kind of regime, even with the countries involved in some mutual disagreements and even conflicts, but regime when we have some instruments to share information and to provide a platform for these conversations. For instance, Shanghai Cooperation Organization. India and Pakistan, as other countries, they signed the same list of terrorist organizations. It means that we, at least from the even legal point of view, we have the same list of terrorist organizations. We agreed on that. Of course, we have a lot of disagreements, but it's a first step, and we will have other steps to create this atmosphere that will help us to deal with hybrid challenges. Thank you so much.
We're almost at the end of the session, but I thought just want to summarize and add a few thoughts. I think there was a question by Ho Chi Minh about if I read you correctly, violence against minorities and sort of marginalized communities and how disinformation is playing a role. In order to protect us against disinformation and misinformation, and I do a lot of work on this subject, and my organization does a lot of work on this subject across Bangladesh. I go back to the points which both General Sahni and Mr. Gul have raised, that you have to be aware and you have to be discerning about what you're consuming. There will always be a deluge of information out there. That is the nature of the information space. I remember in 1992, when we first got satellite television in Bangladesh, or 91, 92. I was quite young. Having 5 channels instead of 1 was like a bonanza. That the fact that we could watch live cricket matches on satellite television or watch BBC World or have ZTV, it was a huge thing. Now I have probably 260 channels on cable and I hardly watch them because everybody watches OTT. Movie theaters have basically gone into disuse because everybody watches content on OTT platforms. So how we process information, get information is changing. In one generation in Bangladesh, we have gone from having fixed line telephones where you had to sometimes dial 4 times in order to get a connection to having 100 million mobile phone subscribers. If I were to use some statistics, Dhaka is the second largest Facebook user population in terms of growth after Bangkok. So in terms of broadband internet penetration, Bangladesh might rank quite low. But if you combine the power of the smartphone, we are huge. 100 million means nearly 5 times the population of Australia is just our mobile phone users. So there will be a deluge of information out there. We are now entering the intelligence age or the age of AI. Disinformation, misinformation will be 10 times more sophisticated. As Mr. Gould said, that sometimes the videos are so cleverly crafted that you don't even realize that it's an AI-produced content. So we have to build awareness. We have to build greater societal harmony. We have to increase resilience. And our state, our governments, our countries have to look at disinformation and misinformation with a greater degree of attention. In Bangladesh, we have started to talk about it, but I don't think it has quite achieved the attention that it deserves. But as I was saying, that in the intelligence age that we're about to enter, we will see a very phenomenal transformation of the internet. Today, through Microsoft Copilot, Google Gemini, ChatGPT, and other AI platforms, in 50 words or 100 words, it writes things for you, which 10 years ago would have taken us 2 days to write. So the whole mantra of technology is to embrace it, but to embrace it with guardrails in place. And those guardrails have to be put in place, whether it comes in terms of awareness, whether in terms of knowledge, whether in terms of our ability to discern. So the first thing is, when you see something, ask a question, what it is, why is it, and whether we should believe it. We could go on for hours, but all symposia must end. We have other things to do. So I would like to bring this to a close. I would once again like to thank the organizers for bringing us all together for this symposia on a very important topic of hybrid warfare. And my heartfelt thanks to our 3 esteemed panelists for giving us plenty of food for thought. The future of global security, hybrid warfare is very important. But a very new and exciting world awaits us. There will be challenges, but there will be plenty of opportunities. Have a great evening.